While we're more familiar with the more infamous masked maniacs that survived the events of 1989, there were several others that weren't so lucky. Among those that perished at the hands of the Russian Mafia was a large portly man named Jake. However, before he died, Jake discovered a dark secret about the calls that few others have discovered. What led to him discovering this secret? And how does it affect the story of Hotline Miami? Well, let's take a look at his actions in-game and find out. The first time we meet Jake, he's just finished shaving his head in his bathroom. After admiring his work, he exits to his small, messy apartment. He has a 50 Blessings pamphlet lying on his counter, which would imply he's a patriot. Like others that have subscribed to 50 Blessings, Jake has been receiving strange messages on his phone, and now he has a message on his answering machine. Unlike the other characters who silently listen to their assignment, Jake bullishly interrupts the caller, demanding to talk to their boss. However, the caller ignores Jake and continues with his assignment, hanging up when they're finished, despite Jake's pleas. Although disgusted with the disrespect just shown him, Jake knows better than to disobey the messages and makes his way to the address. He finds it's a local news station, and when he enters, he finds Russian gangsters inside. He puts on his snake mask and mercilessly slaughters the Russian gangsters. In an office on the top floor, he finds a Russian intimidating the editor of the station. Jake storms in and kills both the editor and the Russian thug. On the desk lies a briefcase filled with money. As payment for his job, Jake takes the briefcase and exits the station. He plans to spend his newfound wealth immediately and heads to a local tattoo shop. He asks for a tattoo of Old Dixie on his shoulder, and the man says they have a slot open next Friday. Jake, expecting to get tattooed this moment, is upset and demands to be tattooed right now, saying he's celebrating a special occasion. The man tells Jake that they're booked for days, so they can't do it today. Jake storms out in anger, calling the man a Russian asshole that reveals his prejudiced nature. Several weeks go by, and Jake has used the money from the news station to buy a new truck. He's also been complying with other messages left on his phone. While doing this, he begins formulating a plan of his own. On June 3rd, Jake receives a message on his phone. He still interrupts the caller, but instead of being standoffish, he's a lot more agreeable and enthusiastically agrees to his mission. Before heading to the address though, he stops by the 50 Blessings headquarters and catches them just before they close. He approaches the manager and begins to tell him of the plan he's been thinking of. He begins by saying he's been getting strange phone calls, and the manager is immediately defensive, saying he doesn't know anything about the calls. Jake goes on, telling the manager about the calls, saying if you don't do what they say, there's consequences. The manager asks Jake what he thinks the calls have to do with 50 Blessings, and Jake proposes that they set up a similar operation. After all, a lot of their members are trained veterans, and they would have the resources to set up an operation like that. He says 50 Blessings could target the Russians as a way to start a civil movement and free America of its oppressors. The manager misunderstands Jake's proposal as an accusation and tries to cover up 50 Blessings, saying it's a peaceful organization that wouldn't force people to do things they don't want to. He says he isn't sure what Jake is accusing them of. Jake says he isn't understanding and starts to clarify when he notices the manager is standing in an uncomfortable silence. Jake then realizes why the manager thinks he's accusing him of the phone calls. 50 Blessings are the ones behind them. Unlike the other characters of Hotline Miami that couldn't understand the truth or were fearful of it, Jake happily accepts it, and as he soaks in his revelation, the manager abruptly says they're closed and rushes Jake out of the building. Jake, thinking the man can't talk about the calls here, says he'll keep the secret safe. He says he'll leave now since he has something important to do. Jake hops in his truck and makes his way to the address left on his phone to see it's a drug den for the Russian Mafia. Proud to be a part of 50 Blessings' civil movement, he storms the building, destroys their equipment, and slaughters all of the Russians. When he heads out, he finds that the manager from the 50 Blessings building has tracked him down and is thankful to find him alive. He asks Jake to come with him so they can talk more. Jake ecstatically accepts the offer and begins to ramble, but is cut off by the manager who says that the cops will be appearing soon so they should head out. Jake agrees and hops in his truck to follow the man. He's led to a small office, and the manager says that since they'll be talking for a while, he's going to go and get some coffee. Jake agrees and begins to enthusiastically tell the man about how excited he is to work with 50 Blessings, when the manager says he'll be right back with some coffee. As Jake sits alone, happily contemplating his future, he scans the desk in front of him and notices a floppy disk. He picks up the floppy, and when the man returns, he pockets the disk. He notices the man doesn't have coffee but is carrying a gun. When asked, the manager simply says it's just a little precaution. Before Jake can react though, the man shoots him in the head, killing him. Betrayed by the ones he trusted, Jake's body is dumped and is later found by the police, where his belongings are collected as evidence. Included among his belongings is the floppy disk he grabbed from the desk moments before his death. And through this, Jake eventually gets his revenge on 50 Blessings. 2 years after his death, in November of 1991, Evan Wright, a local writer researching the mass maniac killings, is allowed access to the police evidence locker to look through Jake's belongings, where he finds the floppy disk. Using the information on the disk, Evan is eventually led to the truth behind the phone calls and the 50 Blessings organization. Wielding this knowledge, he could easily expose the dark secret of 50 Blessings and foil all of their plans, eventually saving the world from a nuclear war. But alas, this is not how things panned out. On June 3rd, 1989, Jake's rampage is stopped by the Russian gangsters he was attacking. Knocked unconscious, his body is dragged out of the building. He's taken to a Russian bathhouse where he's tortured and interrogated by the Russian gangsters. However, Jake endures the torture and never gives up his secret knowledge of 50 Blessings. A Russian gangster levels the gun at his head and asks him if he has any last words. In a final act of defiance, Jake spits at his Russian captors before a bullet is fired into his head. And thus, the character that accidentally stumbled upon the secret of 50 Blessings is ended, and with him dies his dark secret. Later in the day, his body is found by Jacket, who raids it for his snake mask, not realizing the power that was in the head the mask used to house. And when Evan Wright looks through his belongings 2 years later, he finds nothing that hints at the knowledge that Jake had. And that is the story of Jake, a seemingly throwaway character, but actually one that stands in stark contrast to the rest of the cast. He's the only character to discover the truth behind 50 Blessings and accept it, instead of fearing it, refusing to believe it, or being misled to believe something else. This knowledge gave him power over 50 Blessings, and the organization knew that, so they killed him before he could sufficiently wield it. His story really shows the ruthless extents 50 Blessings were willing to go to in order to fulfill their plan. But that's it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. But until next time, thank you for watching and see you later. The people that attacked the Russian Mafia in 1989 were most recognized by the rubber masks they wore while murdering. However, there was an operative that didn't wear a mask, but instead wore a biker helmet to conceal his identity.